Hi, this is Bruce Rawles, and today I have the pleasure of talking with Carol Howe, who is a longtime Course in Miracles teacher and student, and has written a number of books. And some of you might be familiar with her biography of Bill Thetford, which is wonderful. Never forget to laugh. And the subtitle is Personal Recollections of Bill Thetford, Co-Scribe of A Course in Miracles. And just recently, I got a copy of one of her other books, Healing the Hurt Behind Addictions and Compulsive Behaviors. Um, and it deals with addiction on a much broader, generalized spectrum, including addictions to judgment, addiction to thoughts that are maladaptive solutions to a non-existent problem, as our buddy Ken Wapnick might say. And then there's also Homeward to an Open Door, Exploring Major Principles of A Course in Miracles, an ebook. And then there's an 8-part DVD series offering the complete guide to A Course in Miracles. And then a few moments ago, Carol, you were mentioning an audio program that maybe you can give some details on. But I also just want to mention your website, which is carolhowe.com. And that's CAROLHOWE.com. And I encourage everyone to check it out. And anyway, I'm a big fan of your work. And I know you've had a long association with Bill Thetford, and not too many people around still that have those connections and insights that you shared with your personal friendship with Bill. And so anything you'd like to talk about today, course related, would be just wonderful to hear. And anyway, thanks again for having the conversation today.
Oh, well, there's nothing more fun than talking about A Course in Miracles, for heaven's sakes. Yes, I've been at it for, I think, 45 and a half years.
Wow.
And right from the very beginning, basically, there was an article in a magazine called New Realities magazine. And someone sent us a subscription to that magazine as a house gift. He had been a guest in our home. And so he had sent this, and the very first edition that shows up is the one that has the article about the course in it. Oh, what a non-accident that was. And in the article, they do some quoting of Judy Skutch and so on, but they also quote the introduction, that short little, this is A Course in Miracles, it's a required course thing. I read this and I was struck to the very core. I thought, this is for me. So I ordered it, and so many other people apparently were struck by that by the time a few days passed and I got around to ordering, I had 2 little boys at that time. Life was not exactly a bed of roses. It was very busy. Already, they were out of the first edition, the first 5,000 that they printed. So I had to wait until the next printing arrived. So later in the summer, August, I got my first copy, and that's when it was a 3-volume set, and it was in a plain brown wrapper. And I remember it was delivered, and the sun was coming in a west window, kind of shining on this package. And I thought, once I get whatever is in this set of books, I'm home free. It was like very, very clear right from the beginning that this was an amazing, and I didn't know what was in it, but I intuitively knew this is it. This is my way home. And sure enough.
You're right. Yeah, as you were saying that, I was thinking my mom had a copy of that New Realities article too, and it wasn't much long after that she had the 3 blue books in our my parents' home in Northern California, and along with a ever-growing metaphysical library that I grew up with, and so I feel fortunate to have had that influence. And it really wasn't until the mid '80s that I finally cracked open those books and began to read in earnest. But yeah, they were kind of kicking around amongst all the other metaphysical New Age stuff, and occasionally I'd flip open, oh, this sounded kind of religious, but I'll get to it, and then finally I did in '84, I think it was, in the fall. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Well, I had spent my whole growing up years, I was interested in this. I grew up in a metaphysically a friendly household, so to speak, which a long, long time ago was pretty unusual. So by the time I graduated from high school, I had been through the autobiography of a yogi and a whole bunch of other stuff. And that had continued on for probably 25 more years before the course came along. So I was deeply grounded in believing what I was looking for was information. And boy, did I have a lot of information. But of course, only to find, oh, information is not the answer. But did I have a lot of it before that time came? So when the course arrived, and it was like, here, I thought, this is it. I don't know what's in here. Whatever is in here is my path home. And sure enough.
Yeah. Yeah. I think when you open the book and you read that 3-line summary, nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. It's
that
like,
does it.
okay, there's something
Yes.
to this.
Very, very,
All
very.
right, you've piqued my curiosity now, right? So yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. And the rest they
One,
say is history.
and,
So
and you're right. There are practically none of us left who go back to the beginning. John Mundy and I, so far as I know, are kind of the only ones left alive, still teaching, still being active at this, who knew what he knew Helen quite well because they were both in New York, and Bill and I became great friends. So far as I know, there's not anybody else on the planet still teaching who were grounded in relating with all of the early people, Jerry and Bill and Hugh and Judy and Whit and all the people who made up the foundation. So
yeah. So if for someone who's new to the course, what would you say, with the I mean, it's probably a multi-week conversation, really. But if you were to have to make an elevator speech or a few speeches of what were the things that you learned, not just ideas, but maybe examples from Bill Thetford that particularly impressed you, and you cover it beautifully in your Never Forget to Laugh biography, by the way. But maybe for the benefit of people who haven't had the advantage of reading your book first.
Bill was a very humble man. In other words, he never did, you had to pry information out of him. He didn't brag about himself. He didn't promote himself. He was just he radiated a kind of energy. So in many ways, it's not that Bill Thetford was going to give you a big lecture. Bill Thetford was going to be fully present, giving you his very loving, undivided attention. And that works wonders as compared to a lot of chit chat. Now, that didn't mean that we didn't have some wonderful conversations, both at his house and at mine. I'd go visit him and he'd come visit me, but it was simply his very loving presence. And a fascinating thing happened with him. I don't know if it happened with anybody else. I hardly could take a survey, but about 2 days after we were together at wherever we were, all of a sudden, and this would come without warning, I all of a sudden felt more. And if you had to say, well, more of what? I would have no way to answer just more. I was bigger. I was more me. I was more available. I don't know if I knew more. That would be less important than just, but it was almost an actual, tangible, physical feeling, and it would happen suddenly and without warning, and usually about 2 days later. I have no explanation for that. I don't know what was happening, but it was consistent. But suddenly I was bigger, which was just fascinating to me. And it still is, because it's never happened with anybody else, but with Bill, it did.
Interesting. The word that comes to mind that it would be course jargon, I guess you could say, would be extension, perhaps. It's almost like, our real identity, if the course's metaphysics is worth its salt, which I believe it is, if it's all inclusive, then the more we let down and voluntarily drop the barriers we've made to the awareness of love's presence, and including every single specific individual that we've made up as separate, then the lowering of those barriers would seem like an extension of what we really are.
It
One
would.
into the other. Yeah.
It's as good a word as any, since no words really apply. It's like, but that's as good as any to just try to describe what that experience is like. Yeah. And many people reported being healed simply by being in his presence. They didn't have a big conversation about anything. He didn't give them advice. It was just, and not only being in his presence, but listening to his voice. He had a gorgeous voice. And when Bill would talk, it was like you'd died and gone to heaven. It was just, and it didn't matter. He could be talking about the weather, but that beautiful bass voice was just a treasure to listen to. It's almost like healing was built into the experience of his voice. So it was really something. And I've heard recordings of him, and you can, and that's very captivating as well, but it's not the same as in person, as you can imagine.
Sure. Like the difference between hearing some great music on a recording and then being in the a live performance environment. Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
As you're saying that, I was thinking about the tone that's conveyed when we converse with people is I think a reflection of that state of mind, and that inclusive state of mind that it would seem that Bill was exemplifying would be one where there's no defensiveness needed. And
exactly it's that. And of course the course's key presentation is about the way we need to relate with one another. In other words, that our relationships are going to be our way home kind of thing, and that forgiveness is going to be the key. And most people still believe that forgiveness is what you learned in Sunday school, that it means I've got to forgive you, I've got to pardon this other people. It has nothing whatsoever to do with pardoning. It has to do with releasing all that I have put in the way of my own loving experience. And as I often have said, like, I don't even know how many times, it's like the people who drive us the craziest, the course speaks so of relationships being our key helper, so to speak. And by this time, I wouldn't even have any idea how many people I've done private work with. But things tend to be, the big three that bother people are relationships, health, and finances. And relationships always top the list. And so going through a process, which has kind of developed over the years, I didn't do this on purpose, but I found myself saying the same thing over and over and over and over and over to everybody, that, we've all been taught somebody out there without our permission is doing something to us, or behaving in a way that we find disgusting or whatever. And the task of going, the people out here that are driving you crazy are a mirror. They're messengers. They're giving you valuable information about your own guilt. And it's your own guilt that's compromising every aspect of your life. And as long as you think you're being done to, and you're the victim and they're the villains, you will get exactly nowhere. In fact, you will lose ground. But learning how to reframe what's going on in our relationships, of course, is the most valuable information that you can extract, if you will, out of that material.
Yeah.
It's just, it's crucial. But the language people use about what this person did, or what that person said, or this person took all their money, or this whatever, it always, the beginning of the story is always about what these people did and now I'm upset or deprived or ruined or whatever. And so sorting all of that out and like putting not blame, but responsibility back where it belongs is the first stepping stone.
Mhm.
And then the course is very, if you were just to extract a few sentences, and it's going to tell you, you cannot heal yourself alone. You can't sit in your house and go, I am innocent, I'm innocent, I am innocent, and confuse yourself that way. It's only when these messengers or mirrors, whatever you want to call the people who are your learning companions, so to speak, when there is a genuine desire to see that in fact they're still innocent. They haven't really ruined themselves. Their words and deeds might have been awful. So this is not pretending like the words and deeds were just fine when they aren't.
Mhm. Mhm.
There's nothing about pretense, but it's saying, we will call this underneath this, if you look at it in any sort of a diagrammatic way. So the words and deeds can be awful, driven by their own guilt, driven by their own lack of understanding, and matching yours, by the way, which is why they're in your life.
Mhm.
But you might say underneath that and surrounding that, the loving presence that everything is not touched. It's not part of this dogfight. This is happening at the time and space level, and we're asked to pay attention to that, to say, thank you for the message that you're bringing me. You're helping me see how I'm attacking myself. Now, how about if I attack neither one of us, neither you nor me? But its emphasis on relationships is central.
It certainly is. Certainly is.
And
Yeah,
it,
as you're sharing that, I was thinking about the metaphor of the Wizard of Oz, where Dorothy's dog Toto pulls back the curtain to reveal not this scary thing that's up on the screen booming in the great and powerful Oz that has them knocking their knees and trembling in their boots, and no, it's just this little guy pulling levers and trying to make a big show. And if we can see that we're all in that same boat, that we're all pretending to be something we're not, and that really becomes the foundation and the basis for compassion, like you say, that the underneath the substrata of the facade, the reality is eternally innocent, even though we are all adept at putting on an incredible show that really has nothing to do with our true eternal nature.
exactly. And the thing that I find most helpful in making sense of that is we tend to have learned that cause and effect is like a horizontal thing. And people will speak like, I'm so upset today because my ex-husband did this 5 years ago, kind of thing, as if something in the past is still alive and well and following along behind me. And it's like, guess what? There's not any past. There's not any future. There's not a big pile of transgressions, yours or theirs, all piled up behind you, impinging on right now. And as soon as you can begin to strip away the cause and effect is some sort of a big horizontal line thing and go, no, cause and effect is vertical, because there's not a past. This is a learned thing. It's kind of like your computer screen or your TV screen refreshes, and it refreshes so fast that you can't see it. So the screen right now looks like it's a solid thing. We may be moving around on it, but it seems solid. Or your TV screen, and it's really refreshing at many hundreds of times per second, so fast your eyes can't see it. So it looks like a solid picture. So it's kind of like there's not any big pile of stuff in the past. And there's, of course, not any big pile of stuff in the future. So if we can teach ourselves, like, everything that's happening the cause and effect is more like vertical. It's like whatever my experience is right now is being caused by right now. It can't be caused by a past that doesn't exist. And the cause has to be in my own mind. So it's like, oh, good. Well, if we can eliminate the having to, this is what this person did, and this is what they might do, and get all of that out of the way and go, okay, if there's disturbance right now in this moment, the cause is this moment. And if you're sitting at home by yourself and there's nobody there, it's like, if you're disturbed, it's like, this is an internal process. This is our guilt. The cause of any distress is my current guilt. It may not be that I'm currently hitting my little brother over the head, but if I keep carrying forward and refreshing that I'm a guilty party for doing this, and ultimately that wonderful line in the latter part of the text where it says, the tiny mad idea at which I remembered not to laugh. And that tiny mad idea is the idea that we can actually really ruin ourselves or anybody else with our guilt, that we could, that whatever our words and deeds are so bad, and they can be terrible, there's no doubt about that, that we have to get that no matter how terrible the words and deeds, it's not touching that Christ presence in anything or anybody. So we have to kind of look at our love affair with guilt, and there's a reason for that, and recognize that our basic assumptions are all basically upside down and backwards. It's like, if we
So
throw
true.
out the basic assumptions and start all over again, then we would be much better off. But it's not rocket science. It's just being a given, like, how about looking at it this way? If you're at home right now and you're miserable and you can really get it, there's not a past. There's nothing back here that's affecting your misery today. There's something going on right now with you, with your beliefs, not with the reality of you, but with the beliefs about you that are surfacing as guilt or pain or upset or whatever. But the biggest step we take is taking back causation from stuff and things and people out there and bringing it back to us, not for blaming, but for discovery as to what have I learned about myself that's a big lie.
So powerful.
Then I
Yeah.
can go.
Yeah. Yeah.
As long as I think it's really the parents when I was little, or the this or the or the whatever, that I'm doomed to misery because there's nothing I can do about that. All I can do is complain and carry on and make yourself miserable. But if you go, all of these folks are just giving you valuable information, and then things can happen suddenly. I'll tell you a quick little story. I don't know if it's in Healing the Hurt Behind Addictions or not. Probably not. But in any event, in my very early days with the course, I think I was just brand newly with this. And my boys were little then. They were like 4 and 6 or 5 and 7 at the oldest. And we had next door neighbors, very nice people. The oldest daughter was our babysitter. And then there was another child. And then there was the younger brother. Well, the younger brother was about 5 years older than my older son and big for his age. And he would climb over the 6-foot fence. No problem with that. Boys do that all the time. And they would start to play and wrestle around and so on in the backyard. And because he was not trying to be hurtful, but he was just too big a kid to be playing with these little boys. So they'd wrestle around on the grass and somebody would get hurt and somebody would start to cry. And I would run Hank off. Hank, you're too big to play with these boys. And I'd run him out the front door or over the fence or wherever. And it didn't do any good at all. It's like I could look that 5 minutes later and he'd be back. It was like I was tormented by this boy who wanted to play with my kids. Well, somewhere it occurred to me to ask, I wonder if I have a fear that I'm hurtful to my boys, not rolling around on the grass, but maybe I'm too demanding. Maybe I'm not a good mother. Maybe I don't know how to handle some things properly. It's like, but it's for sure that nobody is trying to do a better job of being a mother than I am, but I might be failing at it. Well, with this realization that who it was that I was really worried about hurting my kids was not him, it was me. And then I thought, you know what? Nobody's trying any harder than I am. And so I made a case for myself, so to speak, that I was really not a bad mother after all. I want you to know that after weeks and months, and I don't know how long, of trying to run Hank off and make him stay away, I even said to my husband, we might have to move. This boy is driving me crazy. And of course, he wasn't being driven crazy by Hank. And so he was a very sweet guy, but he couldn't really figure out what was the matter with me, that I just had such a thing about this. Well, the next day or so, when I really dropped my fear, if you will, that I was not being a good enough mother, or I was doing this wrong in some way, starting the very next day, Hank vanished. All my attempts to make him go away didn't do a thing. But as soon as I changed my mind, there was not anything for him to need to be mirroring. Not that he knew that he was being a mirror. And all of a sudden, weeks would go by and I would never see him. Their house was on the corner and their driveway went out that way. And we were the second one and our driveway went this way. And there's a 6-foot fence between our yard. It was like, and when his years passed and his sister went off to college, who was our main babysitter, and when they were just at that age where occasionally they needed a little oversight, I'd have him come be the babysitter. And this is typical of what happens when we discover our own guilt and we think it's that person who's the problem. I find that one of three things will happen. Either that, like with Hank, the problematic person on their own just disappears. Not because you successfully run them off, but because they've got someplace else or something to do. They're just gone. Number two, they may still be in your life and they may still be doing something that looks similar to what they were doing before. And all of a sudden, it just doesn't bother you. Or they may still be in your life and they have mysteriously stopped doing whatever was the annoying thing before. One of those three things will always happen when you see somebody, and this, the people you don't like, when you see them as mirrors and you own that in yourself, and you do the healing within yourself, kind of your own releasing of your own self-condemnation. And then the outer world takes care of itself. You don't have to be managing the outer world in terms of like making this come in and making that go away. It just does that on its own. It's so much easier.
That's a great story, Carol. We'll appreciate that. Yeah. And I was thinking, it's like, and how often, reflecting on what you just said, it's like, how often do we try to micromanage our guilt with well, I'll just, make sure this happens or doesn't happen. And the moment that we, drop those expectations and, it really demands of the world to suit our needs, then it, when it doesn't matter, it's so much easier. Not that we don't care about what happens. It's just that when we choose beforehand, going into a situation, determined to not let what happens or doesn't happen impact our peace.
Exactly. Well, not only do I decide whatever happens is fine with me, we decide to be proactive in that my job here is I want to interact, whether it's, with the proverbial grocery store clerk that we always use for examples, or it's a family member or whatever, when the goal ahead of time is to be kind to them, to notice them, to make sure that they know you're paying attention to them or something like that. And I've had some of the most wonderful conversations with the clerks in stores, stuff that we get into. It's just been wonderful. And it doesn't matter whether it's somebody you know or somebody you don't know. When you're giving somebody your undivided attention and you sincerely want them to know that you appreciate them, that they've got something to offer, and you're noticing what that is, the encounter cannot help but be an encounter that you're very happy to be having.
Yes.
They don't get to decide whether you're going to do that or not. You decide. So it's that making the decision ahead of time. And some strange a strange thing happened at Christmas time that I have no explanation for. And I guess it's an example of strange things that happen. My two boys and their families, and a very dear friend, in fact, the older sister of Hank, who used to be the babysitter, she's now like my daughter. She's like a third child and sort of like a second mother to my boys. I mean, she's like part of our family, and she has two grown girls. So my two boys, their families, myself, and Caroline and her daughter, there were 9 of us, were down in Mexico over Christmas because Nelson has a condo down there, and it was wonderful. And on the way back, for assorted reasons that don't matter, we all ended up being on different flights and different airlines and whatnot. And so I ended up being the last one. The ones before me left about 1 or 1:30. My plane didn't leave until 5:15. So I'm wandering around in the Cancun airport. There's no place to sit down. So I walk around for a little bit. And then I'm finally, when it's 3 hours before departure, you finally can get in the line to check in and check your luggage and so on. So I'm in one of these serpentine lines like this, that maybe an hour and 15 minutes in that line. Well, while I'm in this line, one of the airline employees is inside the little barricades as well. She's walking up and down the line, seeing if anybody's got any questions, if she can, do anything to be helpful and so on. And I could see her stopping, and some people are asking her questions and so on. And I mean, this is a fairly narrow little space we're in. So I see her coming. I'm standing here. She walks in front of me. She turns around and gives me this big smile and says, "Orlando." Well, I had just moved from the Orlando area. And then she walks on by. I thought, what was that about? How does a Mexican employee in Cancun stop in front of me and say Orlando?
You were just exuding Orlando-ness, I guess.
And I was not even thinking about Orlando. I'm thinking about, I have just moved to Denver. So it's like, but I thought, just weird and magical kind of things happen, so it's like, that one was a first, where a stranger in another country stops and says something that's relevant, like where I lived until a couple of months before that. So anyway, but it's a lot of fun. I highly recommend it. In this terms of relationships, is how we heal, is to go, I want whoever it is I'm with to know that I'm happy to be here with them. I wish them well. I'm presuming the best. It's like, and when you do that, things just fall into place. You know, it's really quite magical. And everybody wins, costs you nothing. You know, you're just deciding. It's more fun to be nice to people than to project your guilt onto them and make them be mirrors. So this is not rocket science. It's just what feels better. It feels better to be helpful to people and to be nice to people and to want to uplift people than anything else. Why would you not do what's more fun than anything else?
Yeah.
Truly.
Good rhetorical question. As you're sharing that, I was thinking, it's almost like there's two ways of approaching that, both of which we need Holy Spirit's help for. And one is, like you say, to just cultivate the idea that our default mode can be a proactive kindness, where
Yes.
where we just basically realize that everyone is fighting the same hard battle and really deserves and appreciates when we extend that kindness,
Yes.
whether or not it manifests in behavior, but just the thinking about everyone. If we just kind of
Yes.
notice, when we're having generous, kind, giving thoughts about everyone that crosses our path or our mind, we feel better. And then it seems like the flip side of that would be noticing that when we're not choosing that, how unsettling it is. That's really a depressing, discouraging state of mind, and use that negative feedback, if you will, to choose against that thought system.
I'm going to tell you, I'm going to confess my shortcoming, my that displays just what you're talking about. Last January, my older son, my 52-year-old son, and his much younger wife have a year-old baby. He's old enough to be a grandfather himself, but he now has a new baby who's about 14 months old. This baby is amazing. They're wonderful parents, and they take him everywhere. In other words, they just take him everywhere. And at 14 months old, this is an aside, I get such a kick out of this baby. He's been to England, Italy, Mexico, Colorado, Florida, Pennsylvania, Ohio, sitting on the lap of the pilot in the airline with his pic. His mother got him a little suit, one of those airline suits. It's like, this is the most unflappable baby ever. Well, when he was a brand new baby, he was born in mid-November, and the earliest I could get up there was January of this past year, so a year ago. He's still a tiny little thing. And my daughter-in-law said, nobody can come and see the baby until they have a DPT shot and a flu shot or something else like that. Well, I'm very much not into things like that. Although I did listen to my boys who said, please get COVID shots. Okay, I did. So in any event, but here was the key for this January thing, was the thing I've always hated in my whole life that will get to me, is being ordered around. I felt like I was ordered around a lot when I was a little kid. I don't like being ordered around. So you have to get these shots or you can't come see the baby sort of dictum that was issued. And boy, did that push the being ordered around button. And I did. And I said, this makes me so mad that I have to do this and I'm being ordered around that I'm sure I'm going to be sick. 2 hours later, this is not from the shot. This is from my being so upset that sure enough, I'm at home lying down on my sofa. And for about 36 hours or so, I was really, really sick. I wasn't just, I don't feel a little bit well. I was like really sick, not with anything in particular, just no energy, no anything like that. And it's like, I've had that happen before. I've both made myself be sick, and I have made myself be not sick at the snap of a finger. So I'm very, very clear from my own experience how the attitude and what we're presuming and what's going on with us internally is immediately affecting everything, including what's going on with the physical body. So when I'm driving home from getting these shots, it's like, I'm going to be sick by 2 hours from now. And sure enough, I was. It's like, in a case like that, I wasn't thrilled about being right, but I knew I was going to do that to myself, and I did.
Our minds are really powerful, as the course reminds us. Yeah.
Yes. And the opposite of that is that just shows us how we're always in charge of this is when I was at teaching school as a very young girl. I taught high school in suburban St. Louis. And this was my second year I taught there, and I was living with a set of twins. And it was like 2 or 3 weeks before school started. And it's like, I'm more organized than they. And it's like, we need to paint the walls. There's some furniture we need to get. Once school starts, we're all so busy, it's just impossible to do anything. And so this is way back, because I grew up with you don't bother anybody, and you don't ask for anything, and you don't, mostly you just be like a nice little mannequin standing in the window, bothering anybody. So I was getting more and more and more disturbed by the fact that I could not build a fire under these girls so that we could do some things that I could tell we needed to do. So after 2 or 3 days of being upset about this, I started to have this really bad strep throat, so that every time I swallowed, you know how the tears will involuntarily run down your face. And so these girls they just think, oh, I've just gotten sick from something. I've managed to not reveal the fact that I'm really upset with them, because they won't move fast enough, and I know what's going to happen, and I'm a very organized person. So one of them says, you know what, we have a couple of weeks before school starts. Why don't you go home and just visit your parents down in Arkansas? And it's like, this is like early days of plane travel. We're talking like 60 something years ago. This is a long time ago. And I said, okay. So this is when you can call up the airlines, and the next day you can have a ticket and be on a plane. It was very different from today's air travel. So I get on this plane, and I mean, this is so sore, and the tears running down my face involuntarily. The plane takes off. It's instantly gone. Instantly, not over a period even of 5 minutes. That plane takes off, total healing instantly. So I've both made myself sick on purpose, known I was going to make myself sick, and then make myself well instantly. Well, after you've done that a few times, then you realize, you know what? The body doesn't decide anything on its own. We're the ones who, depending upon the focus of our attention and what's important to us, but it's that focus of our attention that makes all the difference in the world. And so if we wonder if where our attention goes doesn't matter, and we just kind of wander around all over the place with what we're thinking about, it's like, think again.
Yeah. It's a very potent force, the mind, isn't it?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. And we do. We decide, and we don't realize that the power of our intention and where our attention goes.
Which is a good thing to realize, because then we realize, oh, I could see a peaceful
Yes.
situation instead of the projected guilt, anger, fear,
Yes.
attack thoughts.
And sometimes this is one of my first thought experiments. When I was in college, I was a freshman in college, so I'm like 18 years old. So there's some girls in the room with us, and so somehow I'm holding forth about this, what you think matters. And so I said, I'm going to do an experiment tomorrow morning. and I'll show you how this works. So the next morning, I have to go to a biology lab and I have to walk across campus, and it's going to take me 15 or 20 minutes to get from where we live to the biology lab. So the whole way, and I'm fine, I'm in good shape. They realize that I'm just fine when I get up in the morning. So as I start across the campus, I start saying to myself, I feel really terrible. I am really sick. I don't feel well at all. So I keep this up across campus. The first hour of the lab, everything is normal. Then there's a little 10-minute break, and then there's a second hour of the lab. Well, by the time we get to the 10-minute break, I have succeeded in making myself sick. And I end up hopping from the bathroom in one building to another building, both with vomiting and diarrhea, all the way back to the dorm. When I get back to the dorm in the shape that I'm in, and these girls' eyes get to be about this big, because I told them ahead of time I was going to do it. It was not like, oh, look what happened. It was like they were part of the experiment from the beginning. And I ended up having to spend 2 or 3 days in the infirmary. So it was like the sorcerer's apprentice. I knew how to make it happen, but I didn't know how to undo it. As I say, I was 18 years old, not very smart at that point, but I already knew where you put your attention matters.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
we learn that.
that's such an important lesson, isn't it? And to learn that there's really only two thought systems.
Yeah.
There's the one of inclusion and kindness and forgiveness, and where we basically see our interest is the same as everyone else's, and
Yes.
then there's the one that says no, everybody for themselves. You know,
Yeah.
thoughts don't matter. I don't have to be kind or thoughtful
I
or
just have to
forgiving.
know how to manipulate. I have
Yeah,
to,
and
and
then
I have to outwit somebody else and use force if necessary. And oh,
it's exhausting, isn't it?
it is. It absolutely is exhausting. And it's so much easier. It's like, because then you're going with the flow, if you will. And there literally is like a flow where doors open before you have a chance to, you don't need to kick down a door. The door opens before you get to it, and makes it ever so much easier.
It's almost
And
like Obi-Wan Kenobi should have said, "Trust the flow," instead of the Force.
exactly. And it's like, trust my desire. This is always reduces down to the when I'm healed, I'm not healed alone. It's like, trust my desire to want the best for you. Trust my desire that no matter how confused you are, and this you can really practice a lot if you watch the news these days. In other words, no matter what's going on, it's like the presence of love in you, the Christ presence in you is undisturbed by this. And this is what I want to keep remembering about you. I'm pointing to like somebody over here. Like this is how I stay anchored in the truth of me, is to keep remembering the truth of you and realize that your words and deeds might be a little off, or they might be hideous, but whatever they are not coming from the truth of you, and the truth of you is untouched. We don't have to fix anything. We just have to change our minds, realizing the intimate cause and effect between the nature of what we're thinking about and what our experience is, what your physical experience is, what your financial situation is, and so on and so forth. And when we stay anchored on, of course, I want to see the best in you. What is there to gain in doing otherwise? And it doesn't cost me anything. I mean, it's like, this is not like I have to invest something that I'm going to lose, or I'm not gambling when I do this. I can rest assured that things will work out.
Yeah. It's a very, very worthwhile and reliable investment, isn't it?
Yes. Who would not want to invest in something that guarantees 100% what the return's going to be? Like, where else can you invest when you've got that kind of a guarantee?
Yeah.
And you never know how it's going to work out somehow.
Mm-hmm.
That I'm ending up, I never ever dreamed I would be back in Denver. I just presumed I'd spend the rest of my life in my house, which I loved, in a community that I was crazy about, with friends that I loved being with. It's like, why would you want to leave this? Well, you leave this if all of a sudden you get one of those guidance telegrams, as I call them. They're kind of almost directional. They kind of come this way across my awareness. And it's like, all of a sudden comes the directive, move back to Denver. Because of course I lived here for a long time before I left 33 years ago. And nobody could be more surprised than I. Move back to Denver? What? It seemed like an outlandish idea, but I have learned, when guidance comes along out of the blue, unrelated to anything like that, and you get a message, go to Denver, you do it. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know yet all the reasons why I'm here, because I've only been here 2.5 months. But of course, having one of my sons and grandchildren here is a fabulous treat, but that's not the reason. That's like frosting on the cake. Mm-hmm. But whether it's a large thing, like moving is a large thing. Have you tried it lately? You said you've moved several times. I wouldn't consider moving several more times in my life. I'm staying here to the end. And where I am is in, many years ago, my husband and I, it was time for me not to be married anymore. And I was, again, following guidance, and a whole different career and everything opened up. But we always had a very pleasant relationship. And every time I came back here to visit Nelson, of course, we all went to dinner and so on and so forth. So after we sold our house, and I was in Florida, and he moved into this condominium. And so I'm now, this is what you cannot predict. I am now, so my children, when he died several years ago, my boys, of course, inherited this. And so I am now in the condo where my ex-husband lived for 30 years. And it's the identical same number of square feet as my house. So although it's laid out differently, so everything fits. I didn't have to like, what furniture am I going to leave behind? It was like, none. I just bring everything, and it's just all so graciously found its place, so that it's like, if somebody had told me I would end up living back in Denver in this condo, I would have said, well, I can't fathom such a thing ever happening. And it happened.
Yeah.
So it's like everything is, and I have felt, probably as much as any time in my life, of feeling sort of carried, or if I don't know where I've put something, because I don't have as much storage space as I used to have. And of course, I got rid of an awful lot of stuff, but it's as if I'm being led, oh, what you're looking for is in that bottom drawer over there. It feels very supportive and very loving in some way.
Like a grace?
Very much like grace.
Yeah, yeah.
What that grace comes with. I was talking to my business partner the other day, because we still have our business, even though he's there and I'm here. I believe that most of us, probably 99%, maybe 100%, because of the way the brain functions and a few other things. This is kind of at the time and space level. We all grow up with programming, if you will, with beliefs about ourselves, because very briefly, the left brain doesn't come online until we're about 3 years old. So that first 3 years, we're operating on instinct and intuition. There's no thinking going on. And then when we get to be about 3 and we start to literally build a sense of self, the roots of it are in that early experience and what we ended up deducing about ourselves and the world, but not at a language level, more at a, what, I don't know what other language, at a nonverbal level. And of all the people I've talked to, everybody, shall we say, is infected with beliefs that we think are the truth, that there's something the matter with us, that we maybe aren't worthy, or that we're not deserving, or we can't do this right, or we're not lovable. The net being, we're not lovable. And it doesn't occur to us to question that, because it started before, in pre-verbal times. And so we learn our defenses, we learn how to hide, we learn all kinds of things to try to deal with our inherent, we believe, unlovability. And one of the things that's been fascinating about being here, and is possibly one of the reasons for being here, I think there's way more than one, is it's as if I have discovered, not intellectually, but more experientially, more a sense of being lovable for no reason, not because of accomplishing anything, not because of anything else. And as a result of, you might say, a next heightened level of, actually, this is a true statement, it's felt like grace. It's felt like flow. It's felt like everything is in exactly the right place it needs to be. I have exactly the amount of room I need for this. It's that sense of all's well, everything's in its place, everything is unfolding like it needs to unfold. And if A Course in Miracles is about anything, it's about helping us recover our own awareness, our own sense of our own lovability. Because as long as we don't grasp and feel like, well, other people might be lovable, but not me, and that's so built in, we don't go around thinking about it like that. And yet those kinds of macro notions, so to speak, are deeply driving the quality of our lives. And if A Course in Miracles is going to do anything, it's going to take us, in fact, I might cry, it's going to take us by the hand and lead us back to an awareness of our own inherent lovability, instead of our own inherent, here's what's the matter with me.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Wonderful sense. Wonderful sense. Yes. And that I love the word lovability, because I think that's really, something that I really enhances our understanding of the Course's not only metaphysics, but the practical application of it, is just seeing moment to moment. And I was struck with, as you were saying, that the brilliance of the Course, and on pretty much every page, is that it shows those two thought systems: the unlovable thought system of the ego, which is a mistake. It's something that can be corrected. It's not a sin that's beyond repair.
Exactly.
It's a correction that's possible and happily inevitable, that we all will get to at our own pace and on our own time. But the light bulb will dawn for all of us that was just a mistaken self-concept, a mistaken identity that we adopted, having believed that we pulled off this impossible crime. But that ego thought system of unlovability is contrasted and brought together with the lovable true nature of our eternal self on every page, until with enough repetition, if we finally start to notice this, like, well, what if what if that unlovable thought system, that unlovable identity is all made up?
It is. It's
What
the one, it's the one at which we remember not to laugh. It's like,
exactly,
oh,
exactly, exactly. Yeah.
ridiculous that I could possibly ruin my basic nature kind
Yeah.
of thing.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's the the hallmark of kind of, you might say, taking the next step in claiming our lovability, not just intellectually, but at a deeper level, is that there is a sense of grace. There is a sense of flow. There is a sense of whatever you need at any given moment just manages to appear.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
mean it necessarily materializes like you're a magician, but somebody will call, or you will open a drawer and what you're looking for is there. Whatever it is, so that life is uncomplicated. You might be very busy and you might have a lot to do, but it isn't hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we are led every step of the way. I always refer to guidance as like guidance telegrams, and they seem directional. They seem like they come from over here, kind of come across my awareness, and I don't know where they go, but that's kind of what happens. It's what happened both with moving out here and a year before. I mentioned to you earlier, when all of a sudden one day I get this little guidance telegram that says, record chapter 31 of the text. This was because I used to do weekly blogs. That is such a lot of work. I just can't do that once a week now. And I think I say out loud, hey, that's not what I do on these weekend things. I don't just read stuff. I make some sort of little video. It's like, record chapter 31 of the text. It's kind of like a ticker tape thing that goes across my awareness, not my eyes, but kind of awareness is like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, okay, yes, I'll do that. So I recorded chapter 31. Well, I got so much feedback from chapter 31. It's like, record the rest of the text. And I thought, now that is just entirely out of the question. I've got too much else to do. Well, by about Monday, it's like, I'm the one who thinks, that's what I need to do. I need to record. I thought, this is impossible. I'm already really busy. This is a huge project to record 622 pages. But happily, many years ago, the foundation lost the copyright on the first edition. So I didn't have to get anybody's permission. It's in the public domain. So sure enough, I started and recorded and if somebody had told me 5 minutes before that I was going to do that, I would have said, out of the question. But all of a sudden, here it comes. And if you do nothing but read or listen to chapter 31, the last chapter, which is just the most brilliant synopsis of the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like literally the other 30 chapters kind of just get you to chapter 31.
Mm-hmm.
Don't you think it's an amazing
Oh
piece of
yeah,
work?
it's like the top of the pyramid. Is this like the
It's the
capstone?
top of the pyramid.
Yeah, yeah, and that the one section that I'm particularly fond of is the real alternative, the fourth section that basically just says, okay, you've you know done everything you can think of to try every permutation of ego's strategy and propaganda.
Mhm.
Has it worked? Well, no. But do you still want to keep trying yet another permutation?
Yeah.
And then it says, people have died on seeing this, but the point is to go beyond that and to see that there is a peaceful alternative, a real alternative that
Yes.
not only is theoretically possible, but we will all voluntarily
Yeah.
come around to seeing that that's the way out. And that's, like you were
Yeah.
talking about earlier, it reminded me of the line. This is, paraphrasing as usual, being carried down gently carried down a path in summer, and then what could you not accept if you knew that everything was gently planned by one
I won. Yes.
whose only purpose was your good, your optimum welfare, and that is really that part in our mind that just knows that we don't have to worry. We actually can just pay attention gently, a very gentle vigilance to what's going on in our mind. And if we're not at peace, it's like, oh, I just need to throw that switch. And I can always throw that switch at every moment, like you were saying earlier, Carol. This was such an
Yes.
important point.
Yes, nothing prevents us from changing our minds about the purpose of any encounter we have with anybody.
Mhm.
Like, well, this is not rocket science. It's not what we were taught. And it's not what we were taught if you think the other people are the problem. But when you get, no, they aren't the problem. It's like stuff I believe is the problem.
Yeah,
And I can turn anybody into a friend instead of an enemy.
exactly. Yeah. And we do that by seeing that the issue isn't out there. Like lesson 5 says, I'm never upset for the reason I think.
Yes.
The alleged others aren't my problem. It's what I think about the other people and the other things and the other events and circumstances in the world that I need help
Exactly.
with. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's so helpful.
It's an amazing work. And I never tire of noticing and being involved and sort of following intuition and so on and so forth. And some very surprising things have happened over the years. It's when I almost go, you want me to do what? I don't even know how to do that. When it's like, then one little step at a time,
Mhm.
somehow it all unfolds. So
Exactly. Yeah.
I'll tell you, living life without the companionship, shall we say, of the wisdom, our own wisdom that the Course acquaints us with. I just don't know how people manage, quite frankly.
Mhm.
It's like when you've got that kind of a guide, so to speak, and it is just a marvelous guide. As long as, and of course, I would want to make sure everybody knows, don't read it for acquiring information. We're not studying this like we're studying the biology text, where I want to learn a bunch of facts and then, I don't know, do something with the facts. It's like, no, this is leading you to a different kind of way to experience your life.
Mhm.
But it's confusing here you've got something that says a course in miracles. That sounds very academic. And because what we've always thought is that from books and from everything, we're supposed to be acquiring information. And if I can just get the right amount and the right kind of information, then I'm home free. And so we work really hard at getting the right quantity and quality of information. That's all intellectual. That has nothing to do with changing our basic programming, which is what this is for. So I would always want to recommend that when you read this course, don't read it as if you're studying to take a test at the end. Read this as if it's guiding you to have insights, guiding you to have experiences. It should be called a guide to miracles or something instead of a course in miracles.
Yeah.
And we might have a better sense of what it's for. As far as I'm concerned, this is just my own private opinion. It could be wrong, but I really read and studied and looked at a lot of stuff before the course came along. I think it's the best thing out there for doing a major mind change, which can do a major life change. I don't know of anything that that can surpass this in bringing about the effects that it promises to bring if you do what it asks you to do.
Mhm. So true. So true. As you're sharing that, I was thinking, yes, there's a certain amount of, at least basic understanding of the metaphysics of the course. I think that's really helpful and somewhat essential. But beyond that, it's really, like you say, it's applying it, and it's noticing when we're not peaceful and being willing to consider that real alternative, that appointed friend that is in our mind 24/7, 365. It's
Yeah.
gently, patiently waiting for us to choose a different way of thinking about not only each other but ourselves and the world and creation and everything, the whole ball of wax. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
And so it's a tremendous blessing that ended up in our mailbox many years ago, and I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. And that's
Exactly.
why I'm very committed to this. As long as I'm able to breathe, I'm going to keep finding different ways to say the same thing.
Yep.
And I still marvel that there are any ways. When you've done this for 45 and a half years, you'd think you'd run out of ideas, but still things come like, why don't I do this? Or like approach this or say it this way or something like that. So as long as I am inclined, I will continue.
Yeah, yeah. It's good. Like the news du jour becomes a suitable topic for translation, doesn't it? I mean, everything that seems to cross our path becomes our classroom, and seen through that perspective is a blessing and a gift. Huh?
It is. I
Yeah.
have some very, very dear friends, kind of like my godchildren, who live in Kiev, Ukraine. So, of course, I've been keeping up
I can
with
imagine.
them.
Yeah.
And they have their students of the course too, and are keeping such a wonderful attitude and perspective and so on and so forth in the midst of here I am, and I imagine most of us who are listening and paying attention have a reasonably nice life to an outstanding quality of life. And their life is greatly interrupted, and they're managing to keep a wonderful attitude in the midst of it all. So I don't know if you've ever been to Kiev, but
No.
it has been said by some to be the most beautiful city in the world. And I've been there a number of times, and it is, at least was, no doubt the most beautiful city in the world. It dates back to 470. It's an old city too,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it's like, I'm sure they're going to be fine somehow, and they're managing to have a very loving attitude and in the midst of a really awful situation. So I the course is very helpful.
No matter where or who or when, isn't it? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Very much, very much. Well, there's so many things you touched on. I was thinking I could take notes and maybe talk about other things. But we've already gone on for over an hour. I think this hints that we could continue the conversation and pick many of the things that we touched on briefly and further those conversations. So, if that sounds of interest.
Sure, you
Yeah.
bet.
Okay. I know one of the things that you and I both share is a sort of a nerdy enjoyment of applying technology to mind stuff, and having had a hardware and software engineering background myself, and I know you do as well. It's kind of fun sometimes to take some of those metaphors and ideas and apply them to how we practice the course, and that could be just in itself a fun conversation or series of them. And
You bet.
yeah,
I can
yeah.
see very much how my years with IBM as a systems engineer, how one debugs programs and how one debugs people are really basically the same.
Mm-hmm. Yep,
Very
exactly.
much the same.
Yeah. So with that, maybe we'll wrap this up and wish everyone a happy program in their mind to keep on the forgiveness programming. And again, thank you, Carol, for spending the time. And I'll send you links and everything, and to the video and the post and everything. And again, really appreciate being able to share this time with you and your insights and stories and everything. So.
It's my great pleasure to engage in any possible way with the course and those who love the course. So It's been a wonderful time.
Thanks, Carol. I'll just mention real briefly, you can find Carol's work on carolhowe.com, which is CarolHowe.com. And thanks.